Okay, so like I said in the previous video about my ideas for werewolf headcanon, I'm going to talk now about what I use for vampire headcanon whenever I'm writing vampires. And, yeah, so let's get into it. Now, in my headcanon, there are two classes of vampire in most of my headcanon mythology. That being is that you have the very primal, the very modern type, 30 days 30 days of night type vampires, and you have that are called the new bloods or young bloods. Then you have the higher class, the old bloods, or they're the very regal Dracula-esque vampires. Reason being that you have both in this universe are because new bloods, like their name being, are new vampires. They're recently born, and it's not like where vampires just instantly get all the powers of, the Dracula and all that. They have to work centuries to learn and use all these powers. And for the most part, most of these new vampires are, their hunger drives them, whereas the old bloods have learned to control their hunger and become, members of society and have influence, whereas the new bloods are these very primal. They let their hunger get the best of them, and only a small number of them can, go as far as they can, because it takes in my headcanon, it takes centuries for for vampires to learn all these Dracula level powers. I have it that Dracula is the alpha and omega vampire. He there are very little few vampires that can do what he does. There's a very little number of them, and he's more or less their, I wouldn't say king, he's more like their, I guess you could say their equivalent to Jesus. He's he's the undead Messiah, more or less. That's what most vampires consider him in this headcanon, is that he's the, wouldn't say he's not the Antichrist, he's more like he's their equivalent to, he's a vampire equivalent to Jesus. And in some writings, I have that he's still alive and he rules the other vampires. And in other cases, I have him dead, but his influence his influence lives on, and you have these higher class vampires that are in control of certain groups. Because I want to have it that Dracula, in some cases when I have him there, he is the undisputed king because they need one. And in other times where I have him dead, it's mostly because he died fighting Van Helsing, as he died in the book, and from there, vampires have kind of learned to self-govern themselves and have these little sets or whatever that terminology is, where they have their own little gangs and they have their they have the ruling class, and they all have their own little territories and like to self-govern themselves. However, that kind of leads to infighting, whereas with Dracula around, he usually keeps everyone in line and has, look, we're not... And here's the other thing, the whole what's the human-vampire conflict? There is none, because whether it be when I'm writing with Dracula in the universe or dead in the universe, either way, the vampires kind of realize, if we have no chance because there are not a lot of us, and we have a shit ton of weaknesses. Humans could easily, when the sun goes up, humans could easily just come to our houses, take us over. And on the off chance that we do win, we have humans as cattle, we'd be running out of a food supply very quickly. Because, we either feed on them, and they turn into vampires too, or it would be kind of difficult because, it takes a long time for humans to be born and then to grow up. And I even have it that with certain blood type, each blood type has their own taste to it. Vampires have a very have a taste palette for different blood types. It's kind of like drinking wine for them. They don't have their own acquired tastes. And in most cases, even age, also with wine, depending on the age of the person, it all depends. That also is the taste of the blood for a vampire. Is that let's say a very old person can have this very stagnant, almost like cider taste to a vampire in terms of blood for them. Where you have a young person who is that's the prime of it. That's their prime. Someone in their late teens, early 20s. That's their prime chance for feeding. That's why you see a lot of vampires in that kind of age these days, where you have also vampires that are, if they feed on someone who's like taking drugs or alcohol, it's like food poisoning to them. They'll be, if they feed on someone who's like meth, completely stoned out of his mind on meth or cocaine, the vampire's going to have he drinks the blood, he's going to have a horrible reaction. He or she's going to have a horrible reaction to it, vomiting, just completely sick for days. And it's worse with alcohol. It's not worse with alcohol. They don't get drunk off of drinking someone, an alcoholic's blood. It's more like, again, it's it's a horrible taste, and they're left sick for weeks after that, and they need, people to help them. The other thing with going back to the hierarchies is that, there are new bloods who work with high blood, with the old bloods, and then there are some that just kind of like want to do their own thing. They just want to hunt, have their own packs, and their own tribes. And most high bloods mostly look down on new bloods, like, oh god, we have to share now, or they're just a bunch of wild kids that need to be brought to heel. And yeah, and again, it takes a long time for vampires to learn so many skills, and that's why they're also very susceptible to why the new bloods don't last very long. Like a lot, some of them are just so stupid they think they're invincible and will purposely like fight out in sunlight, thinking oh, the sunlight can't stop me. You're wrong. That's the other thing where I do have it that the sunlight is a crucial weakness, but young bloods can be, young bloods, new bloods, same difference. They can be instantly killed by it, whereas new bloods can be, old bloods can be, they can be affected by sunlight as well. It could actually kill them, but it takes a while because they've trained themselves to expose themselves to sunlight. Having said that, though, they can't stay out in sunlight, they can't stay out a full day. The max they could probably go to is about 4 hours. That's about it. 4 hours in sunlight before they have to be like, I gotta go back. I can't stay out here. So in that regard, yeah, they can stay out there, but not for long, and at least keep up stay out for about 4 hours. Keep up appearances, and then go back to their coffin or to feed on blood. The other thing is that when feeding, the other thing in terms of blood is that, the question you're probably asking, well, why can't vampires just feed on cattle and animals instead of humans? That's the other thing, is that it's kind of like having just a vegetarian diet in my headcanon. It's in how I write is that, vampires could feed on just cattle and, farm animals and, just animals in general instead of humans, but they wouldn't be getting the same nutrients as they would from, having they need human blood. It's like, it'd be like drinking diet soda for the rest of your life. It would not do well for you. They could feed on it, but they wouldn't be getting the same, kind of nutrients, and, eventually they would just find themselves getting weaker and weaker the more they feed on. It's like having just having a one-track diet. You can't do that. I mean, you could have that on the side, but, you have to stick to your main, to all forms of the food pyramid. Or in this case, the blood pyramid. So that's kind of that's the thing. In terms of let's talk about half breeds real quick. Half breeds in my headcanon are also susceptible to sunlight, but however they can stay out about 6 hours until they have to get out of sunlight. They also have only half the strength of a normal vampire, and they more or less have half the power. But they can train themselves to get stronger. They do have the possibility to get stronger. Also, half breeds are also they have weaknesses. Like I said, they have the same kind of weaknesses too. They can only stay out in sunlight for an X amount of time, but they also need to feed on blood. However, they don't need to feed on it as much as vampires do, in which in this headcanon, for new blood vampires, new blood vampires need to feed about 3 times a week. Because it's a new body, their metabolism's been increased to an incredible amount, so they need to feed more to burn that, to help, compensate for that. Whereas old bloods have trained themselves to feed at least once or twice a month. They don't need, they can stay on one body, 1 or 2 bodies a month to, sate themselves. Whereas, like I said, the new bloods need to, constantly feed. And some of them just like to feed because it's fun. They don't know any better, where you have the old bloods, hence their name. They've been around centuries, and they're more upper class, they're more regal, whereas they look down on the new bloods and like, God almighty, they're just a bunch of wild animals. So and like I said, they don't really get, new bloods need to train to use their powers. Like they need to learn how to change into a bat, wolf, mist, hypnotizing people. Although hypnotizing people in my headcanon is usually one of the first powers new bloods learn to use, where a majority of them learn, hypnotism is one thing. But yeah, getting back to half-breeds. Half-breeds also, another thing, and this is crucial, is that half-breeds need to be born from human female, they need to have a human mother. Why can't it be the other way around? Because, if it's a female vampire, female vampires can't really give birth because everything down there is not working. Everything that you need to give birth to children, it doesn't work anymore. Because obviously you're not alive, so you can't really, a female vampire's not really alive, so she can't really sustain life. She can't really sustain life, so that's usually why, it's, male vampires and, and the mother is human. Because the mother can obviously sustain life. And, obviously it's also kind of difficult for, for male vampires to have them. This is why also daywalkers or half-breeds are also, in my headcanon, very kind of scarce. There's about only a total of about 100 total in my universe, where there's about 100 to 150 half-breeds, because it's kind of difficult to, get enough blood flow for, so it takes a while. It's also very difficult, and some of them, most half-breeds don't even, survive the birth, even, so they don't, they can't really survive the birth either, so that's why there's such a rare, there's only about a little over 100 of them in this universe, is because it's so friggin' difficult. They also are not immortal. Half-breeds also are not immortal. They can live out, where vampires aren't true immortals, half-breeds can only live about 300 years max. 400 if you're, almost to 400 if you're lucky. But yeah, only for about 300 years, and then that's about it. Whereas their fathers, the vampires' respective fathers, can outlive them. But yeah, they all, also the half-breeds need to feed on blood too, but they can sustain themselves for a little longer. Like they can eat solid food and other things, but they still need the blood to keep them to keep their not really much their youth or anything. They need that because that's a part of their genetic structure, and as well as that's how they need to get their nutrients, like I said. So they only need, but they need to feed about even less than that. They can feed on 1 or 2, maybe about 3 humans every 6 months. Every 6 months they need about 3 humans to feed on. Well, actually, even less than that. Yeah, about 1 human every 3 months. Yeah, 1 human every 3 months gets unlucky and they feed on them. But yeah, so that is for what it is. So that's what it is. Also, among other things, is that like in my werewolves headcanon, vampire headcanon, is that in my vampire headcanon, there are different clans and, like I said, groups. There are also different species. Like you have the South American breed, which are like again they come the Mexican breed are very much like from Mayan mythology, those type of vampires. You also have the classic European vampires. You have the Jiangxi, which are the Chinese vampires. Those exist. You have the the Filipino vampires. There are different species out there, whereas werewolves, they're more. It's taken a while for them to get out there and continue on as different breeds. The vampire classes, you can find vampire mythology everywhere, and it's all in this headcanon, they all exist in their own little groups or whatever. Or in other cases, Dracula rules he stays in Budapest and rules over everybody, and the other like higher class bloods among their respective species are like the governors. They they're more or less the governors of their clans, but whatever he says goes. Now, Dracula is not the first vampire in this continuity. He's just one of the most powerful, and the first vampires in my headcanon actually hailed from Greece. They, like, again, in mythologies, that they hailed from Greece, and or even in biblical mythology, where I've sometimes changed it where Lilith was the first. Not Lilith, excuse me. There have been in some cases where people don't, even vampires don't know where the first vampires came from. They've been around forever, and they kind of change it around. So I kind of like to keep it open, but Dracula is he's the oldest, so he's one of the oldest. There are others out there that are sometimes even, but they're smaller because they tend to get killed by the other, because sometimes there may be turf wars, and old bloods can only contend with other old bloods, and Dracula makes it his mission to make sure there can't be any vampires that could usurp him. So he does rule with a tighter fist than the other ones. So in case old bloods want to step up to him, he knows when to put them down. So anyway, so that's a little bit about my vampire headcanon. Also, once again, if you want to check out what I have for werewolf headcanon, you can go back and check that out. You can go back to the previous video and check that out, what I have for werewolves. But yeah, once again, I hope you all enjoyed me talking about my vampire headcanon. And on a whole, I hope you enjoyed both videos, and I will see you guys later.